This is the U.S. Report with James Morrow.
Good evening and welcome to the program. What a week! Subpoenas, resignations, lies, debates. We have a jam-packed show for you. Coming up tonight, out for blood. Republican rivals go head-to-head in the fourth GOP debate. Were there any surprises? We'll find out with Mick Mulvaney shortly. Also tonight, the presidents of prestigious colleges show their true colors in stunning testimony about anti-Semitism on campus. The head of accuracy in media is holding them to account, and he'll join us a bit later in the show. Plus, the battle continues over the southern border. Democrats try to ignore the worsening migrant crisis again. But first, with everything else that's going on, let's not take our eye off the ball. Long before the war broke out between Israel and Gaza, long before the GOP started holding its debates, long before even the whole slew of trials designed to ensnare Donald Trump and stop him from returning to the White House, there was this one increasingly incontrovertible fact. Namely, that Joe Biden and his wastrel son Hunter's business dealings were far more connected than either one of them cares to admit. And in the coming year, the Biden family business schemes are going to present a massive problem for the Democrats that is going to weigh heavily on the minds of those who decide whether or not Joe Biden actually is allowed to run again. Consider this from a press conference just 2 days ago, when the president was asked about his business dealings with his son Hunter's business associates.
Can you explain to the Americans, amid this impeachment inquiry, why you interacted with so many of your son and brother's foreign business associates?
I'm not going to comment on that. I did not, and it's just a bunch of lies.
You didn't interact with many of their business associates?
I did not. There's lies.
Lies, just a bunch of lies. Not even a malarkey. Were you convinced? I wasn't, because if you look at just some of the documented meetings between Joe Biden and Hunter Biden's business associates, it doesn't look like these were lies at all. It looks, in fact, like a pattern of corruption between Hunter and Joe to sell influence and access to the U.S. government. Here's a small and entirely incomplete list just to get you started. In November 2010, Joe Biden had a sit-down meeting with Eric Schwerin, the president of Hunter's private equity firm, in the West Wing, and used a secret email to exchange hundreds of emails between them when he was vice president. In December 2013, Hunter flew with Joe Biden aboard Air Force Two to China, where he introduced him to Jonathan Lee, a Chinese businessman. Next year, April 2014, Joe Biden met with Devon Archer, another co-founder of Hunter's private equity firm, in the White House a week before Archer joined the board of Burisma. Remember our Ukrainian oil and gas friends? August 2014, pictures showed Joe Biden golfing with his son Hunter and Devon Archer while they were both, that's Hunter and Devon, serving on the Burisma board. I wonder what they discussed at the 19th hole. April 2015, Joe Biden attended a dinner in Washington, D.C. with Hunter's business partners from Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. Would have been an interesting chat. November 2015, Joe Biden hosted his son's Mexican business partners, Carlos Slim, Miguel Alaman Velasco, and Miguel Alaman Magnani, at his personal residence. May 2017, Joe Biden meets with family business partner Tony Bobulinski twice. And that's the same, by the way, Tony Bobulinski, who testified under oath that the big guy, the guy who was getting 10% of everything, was none other than Joe Biden. It's funny. I was thinking about this. It seems like for the left, corruption is fine, selling access is fine. I suspect they would have looked at that and thought the biggest crime of the Bidens was using that triggering word guy. But hey, guys, I got to ask, why is the president lying? Well, I think it's fairly obvious. On the subject of Bobulinski, he voluntarily provided testimony to the FBI that he met Joe on 2 occasions in Beverly Hills, California in 2017. On the first time, Jim and Hunter were present, and on the second time, Bo Belinsky met with Joe Biden alone. The New York Post Miranda Devine reports this week that Bo Belinsky told her, "Why is Joe Biden blatantly lying to the American people and the world by claiming that he did not meet with me face to face? He should call his son Hunter and brother Jim as they can remind him of the facts. The American people deserve the truth. I call on Mr. Biden to stop lying and correct the record," he said. Now, beyond all this, there is other sworn testimony. Bank records, emails, texts, WhatsApp, the whole box and dice linking Joe to Hunter's business ventures. Joe, remember, is the guy who was to be the figurehead that Hunter was selling access to. Without Joe, Hunter has no business model at all. It stinks, and it's corrupt, and it represents the selling out of America by the side of politics that loves to pretend that it's squeaky clean while acting like Republicans are the real crooks. Burisma, the Chinese, even the wife of a Russian oligarch who just managed somehow, coincidentally, to stay off the sanctions list after Putin invaded Ukraine, well, they're all the beneficiaries. This ain't going away, and if the press does its job, it will have a big bearing on what happens next November. Let's get to the rest of the week's top stories with our U.S. Report regular, former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, another big week, and it seems like another Republican presidential nomination debate. We had a bunch of hopefuls go head-to-head for debate number 4, and there was no shortage of theatrics, particularly from Vivek Ramaswamy, who had a big old go at Nikki Haley. Have a look.
Nikki, I don't have a woman problem. You have a corruption problem. And I think that that's what people need to know. Nikki is corrupt. This is a woman who will send your kids to die so she can buy a bigger house. This is the problem. Using identity politics more effectively than Kamala Harris is a form of intellectual fraud. And it actually needs to end. There's our donor puppet masters wielding their puppet right up here tonight. This is how this game is played.
Well, Mick, the Oxford Debating Society, this was not. You were there at the debate. I'd love your take on that and how it all went.
Yeah, James, that was actually probably one of the highlights for Vivek Ramaswamy last night. He performed very, very poorly. It was almost as if he was auditioning for a social media job as opposed to the president of the United States. Those types of shenanigans were regular last night. He was attacking everybody who he possibly could. He was going over time. He was talking over people. It was really a bad experience. CNN in this country, who of course leans heavily left, gave him an F- last night on his debate. They gave Nikki Haley an A, if you can believe that. So nobody is pleased with Vivek Ramaswamy's performance last night. He really did embarrass himself. My guess is, because of the way the Republican National Committee is raising the thresholds on how well you have to do in polling to get on the next debate stage, this is the last we've seen of Vivek Ramaswamy in this campaign nationally, and folks are happy to see the backside of him.
Yeah, look, my whole impression was that he was playing for the Twitter grabs and not necessarily for, anything else. But, what is the point then of these debates going forward? Because my impression, I'd love to hear what you think. I think Ron DeSantis did very well without the pressure of a Trump, in the room or in his ear or living rent-free in his head, perhaps. I thought Nikki Haley, she comported herself well, although I didn't agree with everything she had to say. But why are people like Chris Christie and Vivek still out there trying, to make their case?
Well, Chris Christie is easy because he hates Donald Trump, and any chance he gets to tell you how much he hates Donald Trump, he's going to take. And that's somewhat refreshing. At least we know why he's there, and he's being honest and straightforward about it. As to the other folks, it's sort of anybody's guess. There's probably more than one answer to your question. Nikki Haley might be running for a cabinet position. She might be running for vice president. She might be running for a slot on the 2028 ticket. Ron DeSantis might be running for some of the same things, although I don't think he's on a vice presidential candidate. In fact, no, he's not running for the cabinet because he would never work for Donald Trump. But he might be running for 2028. And all of them are sort of running, saying, you know what, if Donald Trump gets hit by a bus tomorrow, look at me. Because I don't think they're actually trying to catch him. In fact, there was an entire segment last night. Again, I work for the company that put on the debate here in the United States, and we put in an entire section for 20 minutes, giving those folks the chance to attack Donald Trump, and only Chris Christie would do it. It's almost as if they're afraid to attack him. So are they running for second place? Maybe. Are they running for 2028? Maybe. But the bottom line is the needle did not move. And if the election were held today, Donald Trump would win going away in the Republican primary.
And how much damage did Chris Christie do? I don't have a grab of it, but he did talk about or refused to, criticize the way the Justice Department and some of those machinations of the legal system have been weaponized against Donald Trump, which seems to be a core belief, I think a correct one largely, on the Republican side. Has he just completely damaged his credibility here in his attempt to just keep getting a platform to smack the Donald around?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a lack of credibility. I don't know if it's him because it's been a while since Chris Christie has been in the public eye in the United States, or if I don't know if he's just the wrong messenger. His message was pretty good last night. His message, look, if you're going to try and catch Donald Trump, here's the message. There's a really good chance he's going to get convicted. And the polling data, and by the way, the network that put on the debate last night did really good polling data. I looked at it in depth. And what the polling data showed is that up to a third of the Trump voters think he should be disqualified from the ballot if he's convicted of a crime. And what Christie said last night, look, if a third of his voters leave him because he's convicted, he's never, ever, ever going to win against Joe Biden. Therefore, you should vote for me. That's the message. It's just falling on sort of deaf ears because no one wants to vote for Chris Christie.
That does seem to be what the polls are telling us. Now, speaking of Donald Trump, he decided not to attend the debate. He instead did a town hall with Fox the night before. Is this a good strategy for him? I mean, is he going to wind up debating Joe Biden? And do you think there's even, if he becomes a nominee, as we presume he does, will the Democrats even consent to a debate with Donald Trump?
In fact, I sat on the airplane this morning, coming back from Alabama with one of the members of the Republican National Committee, and they've sort of resigned themselves to the fact there probably won't be a debate between Trump and Biden. Trump would be desperate to want one, of course, but the Republican National Committee has not agreed to the rules of the bipartisan debate commission, and Biden doesn't want one anyway. So the chances of us seeing them in a debate are probably close to zero. Going to Trump's town hall last night when he said he'd be a dictator on day one, I've spent a lot of time with the president. This is his way of trolling his detractors. He doesn't really mean he's going to be a dictator on day one. He knows the response that it's going to get. He knows the media cycle it's going to drive. He knows it's going to suck all of the air out of the attention that went to the debate last night. And he was right about that. Again, he's one of the best gut politicians I've ever seen in my entire life. Is the left setting their hair on fire tonight over his comments? Yes. Are folks like me who are critical of the president from time to time worried he's going to be a dictator? No, our system simply doesn't allow that. But if you hate Donald Trump, he gave you all the more reason to do so again last night.
Well, I want to ask you, the last week I've seen this fascinating thing where the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic Monthly have all come out with very similar big, long think pieces about how Trump is going to be a dictator. They're calling him, they're saying, well, at least Hitler had standards is basically what some of these things are saying. Are we seeing in this kind of these elite media outlets the strategy now being put out that the Democrats are going to be running against Donald Trump?
Well, no, you're absolutely right. That is the playbook. The playbook right now for the Democrats, for Joe Biden, and for every race down ballot, for the Senate, for the House, for governor, I don't care, for dog catcher, is that if you vote for the Republicans in general, and if you vote for Donald Trump specifically, democracy is going to end. That is the playbook. When the Democrat Party that sends out their messages to all of their surrogates, all of the major media outlets see that, and they're picking up on that. They all go to the same parties together. They all went to the same schools together. They all hang out in a group. So it doesn't surprise me that you get this sort of groupthink and this consistent message across all levels of the left-leaning media. They can't run right now. Joe Biden is really struggling, James, on issues of the border. Goodness gracious, on the economy. He's really having a trouble even on Gaza. So they have to have a different topic. And right now the topic is, if you vote for Republicans, and specifically Donald Trump, the world is going to end. And they're deadly serious about that. It remains to be seen if that's a winning argument.
Yeah, I suspect people might think that's a little overcooked, as we say here in Australia. But you mentioned the border. Interesting thing here this week, Senate Republicans have blocked an emergency funding bill which would have given aid to Ukraine and Israel. They're instead calling for tougher border measures as the migrant crisis worsens. This is a real interesting game of chicken that's happening here. I mean, I think the Democrats are making a bit of a strategic mistake trying to mix Israel and Ukraine too much. But are the Republicans on a winner saying, you know, this at-home issue, the border, is the thing that we really need to focus on first? How is this playing out on the Hill and more broadly?
Yeah, I'll speak to the politics of it. We talk about the practicalities of the real-world applications if you want to, but the politics of it, the Republicans are actually going to win on this issue just because the border is such a huge issue right now across both parties. You and I have talked at length about the impact of this open border on cities, Democrat cities like New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles. Even the Democrat mayors of those cities are complaining about the border. The border has become a bipartisan issue, and the Republicans are making some pretty good political hay trying to tie border security to just about anything else they can get. They're also upset, by the way, James, because of this $106 billion that the Biden administration has asked for. It's an astronomical sum of money. Only $10 billion is earmarked for Israel. 60 billion, more than half, goes to Ukraine, which a lot of the Republicans are really, really iffy about. So the practicalities are one side. Whether or not they have a chance to sort of deal with this before the end of the year when the Biden administration says Ukraine's going to run out of American money, that remains to be seen. But the politics of it right now are working in the Republicans' favor because the border is such a big issue with people outside of the traditional circles.
Mick Mulvaney, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me tonight on the U.S. Report.
Thanks, James.
Well, let's get straight into it with my next guest. Joining me now is trial lawyer Robert Barnes. Robert, thank you so much again for joining us on the U.S. Report. The GOP House Oversight Committee this week released more documents which showed Hunter Biden's business entity made payments to Joe Biden. Let's hear a bit of this from Committee Chairman James Comer.
The House Oversight Committee is releasing subpoenaed bank records that show Hunter Biden's business entity, Owasco PC, made direct monthly payments to Joe Biden. This wasn't a payment from Hunter Biden's personal account, but an account for his corporation that received payments from China and other shady corners of the world.
I mean, Robert, if there was any more smoke coming from this gun, the fire detector in this room would be going off. Take us through the latest.
What we're seeing is that Joe Biden, ever since he became senator, weaponized access to his office and used his family, his brother, his sisters, and then ultimately his son, as the intermediary, as the collectors of that amount of money. I mean, nobody thinks anybody was buying Hunter Biden's brilliant legal insights when the Chinese government, the Ukrainian government, Russian oligarchs, and all the rest were buying access. And now we're seeing that the money trail does end up in the pockets of Joe Biden directly. We knew that there was indirect evidence from, the way he was able to purchase his home for straight cash and on the Delaware beach, other aspects, text and emails where Hunter references 10% for the big guy and other shares for the big guy. But now the Congress has been able to literally trace and track the money like a criminal money laundering case right back to the bank account of Joe Biden from the original source contribution of these foreign governments paying off Hunter Biden for access to Uncle Joe.
Well, and you just said something there really interesting I want to pick up on here. You talked about buying that house for cash. One of the things that I've found really fascinating about the Bidens through this whole investigation and affair has been the way there seems to be an awful lot of money floating around the Biden family for the Joe and Jill who did not come from money, who were public servants their whole lives, and somehow have all of this cash to not only buy houses and cars, but also keep putting Hunter through rehabs, pay his child support, and lots of other things like that. Normally, wouldn't investigators look at these sorts of things and say, hang on, this person has got more money than they should have. They've got more stuff than they should have.
Absolutely. It's your classic illegal source income case. So the way the IRS, caught Capone was looking at his spending and saying, could his spending be explained by legal sources of income? And here you look at the spending on behalf of Joe Biden, the houses, the vacations, a wide range of personal amenities, and say, can this be explained by a senator's salary? People just on a Washington, D.C. salary, as nice as that can be compared to the ordinary American, still doesn't buy you beach homes in Delaware and straight cash. That's your classic indicator of drug dealer behavior, mafia behavior, criminal behavior. Because it's your classic indicia of illegal source income that they use to entrap and get people all the time. And here we're just seeing classic examples of not only illegal source income, but old school money laundering, of just laundering donations that are really meant for access to Joe, but through the business accounts of them. And there are so many of them. I mean, it's extraordinary. Basically, they set up a shell operation to disguise the fact that they were laundering illegal bribes to Joe Biden through his own family and the various entities they created for it.
And Robert, this week, too, we had the Oversight Committee, that House Oversight Committee, announcing that Hunter Biden has to appear for his deposition next week on December 13. What is the legal process here? Does he have any choice? Do they have the power to compel him? And we had seen this standoff going on between Hunter saying, well, we'll only do it if it's in public. How is this all going to play out?
I think ultimately he's going to have to sit for the private deposition without being able to grandstand and avoid and evade it in the way he wants to. Now, he can assert a Fifth Amendment objections that anything he says can be used against him in the proceedings, given that his plea deal got blown up, so he can't. He still has available to him the Fifth Amendment, but that would, of course, would be damaging to his father's cause. So he can't completely avoid it. I mean, that's what Steve Bannon tried to do, and that didn't go well for him ultimately. You can make arguments that you have privileged information, but you have to assert those at the deposition. You can't just avoid the deposition entirely.
And if, things come out in that deposition that are incriminating before that House committee, then does that give prosecutors ammunition that they can use against him to lay further charges? Or where does that go? Because this legal system seems a bit opaque for us here in Australia. What impact does it have if he says something that really does wind up either perjuring himself or getting him into trouble or revealing something about the Biden family business?
I think most counsel would advise him to take the Fifth Amendment, but I think for political reasons, he's not likely to do so. And thus he runs the risk that if he lies or says something that's a provable lie, he can be subject to perjury prosecution. Like, for example, a lot of the alleged crimes he's committed over the years are outside the statute of limitations. Can't prosecute him on a whole bunch of those things anymore, including the tax crimes. But if he could reopen the door to that, if he lies about something, because then all of a sudden it becomes perjury, you can argue it's conspiracy to commit ongoing tax fraud, then you can bring all those charges right back up. So he faces substantial criminal exposure if he's in any way dishonest. And then there are those that believe he and his sister have been trying to cry out for help by, leaving laptops behind, by leaving diaries behind. Maybe he'll do that. Maybe he'll use that as the opportunity to come clean and expose and get rid of the guilt of having to be his dad's bag man for so many years.
Well, I think, Robert, that whole family dynamic in there between Hunter and Joe and his stepmother Jill is absolutely fascinating. And I think you're right. I think that a lot of that dynamic is driving what we're seeing. But we're going to have to leave that there and talk to you about this more in the new year. Thank you so much, Robert Barnes. But you don't go anywhere because we're taking a short break. And when I'm back, how American universities rediscovered their love for free speech. So long as that free speech is being used to call for a genocide against the Jews, of course. But hey, whoop, a new Trump ad just dropped. Let's have a look.
Weak leaders talk about the possibility of war.
American troops fighting Russian troops.
Because they are weak and insecure. It's time for a strong America. It's time to make America great again. So this
American troops fighting Russian troops
never happens.
I don't know what you thought, but I thought it was a pretty brave move there for Donald Trump to run an ad on foreign policy. I mean, the world's just been so much more stable and peaceful since Joe Biden took over. How could things get any better? Ivy League chiefs reveal who they really are next. Welcome back to the program. In a moment, I'll be joined by the president of Accuracy in Media, Adam Guillette, who has been holding anti-Semites and Hamas sympathizers on American colleges' campuses to account in the most amusing way. But while we're on the subject of what's going on American college campuses, there were some absolutely stunning scenes Wednesday when the presidents of 3 of America's most prestigious universities went to Capitol Hill to testify about the rise of anti-Semitism on their campuses. How, legislators wanted to know, could universities that spend their every waking moment policing students and professors for microaggressions and misuse of pronouns and misgendering and all that nonsense? How could they let pro-Palestinian students rampage across campus, threaten Jewish students, and even call for genocide? Well, let's have a look at what they had to say when they were asked this very question.
At MIT, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate MIT's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
If targeted at individuals, not making public statements.
Ms. McGill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
I am asking specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision.
And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
So time and again, they were asked to concede that the calls for genocide that have been ringing across their campuses amounted to hate speech. You'd think this was a pretty easy moral test, but it's a test they failed repeatedly. Instead, all of those college presidents said, oh, genocide, well, that has to be put in context because, hey, this is what free speech looks like. Really? Well, look, on one level, it would be almost admirable for them to stand up for free speech, except for the fact that at all of these institutions, the administrations have as much respect for true free speech as a toddler does for table manners. Take MIT. Look, they have a terrible free speech problem there. They made headlines around the world when they canceled a lecture by a prestigious climate scientist, Dorian Abbott, simply because elsewhere he had criticized affirmative action and diversity programs. Just one example. And yet they seemed to have no problem with pro-Palestinian students the other week blocking Jews from attending class like it was 1938 Berlin. MIT, by the way, ranks way down at 136, near the bottom of the free speech rankings table put together by the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. Now, the University of Pennsylvania, well, they've also been in the news, and they went through the trouble of trying to investigate and fire a professor who had made anti-Asian comments. Now, turns out she would have been safe, apparently, if that professor had simply called for intifada against the Jews. And Harvard, the third of those clowns you saw there, well, they ranked dead last in free speech, according to Fire. And I could show you a whole hour's worth of times conservatives were banned, evicted, or shouted down on that campus. Look, all of this is very grim, but also, I think, pretty predictable. Where we are now on these campuses is the end point of identity politics and the lies we have been told about identity for the last 5-10 years or more. Because we know that when you put racial identity ahead of human dignity so that you can get kudos on campus, an advancement, and a cheap sign to put on the lawn to show what a good person you are, and when you decide that whiteness is problematic, and look at everything through a lens of oppressed and oppressor, well, this is what you get. A return to the same sort of barbarism and moral rot that civilization and enlightenment was supposed to lift us up out of. Now, joining me to discuss all of this is Accuracy in Media President Adam Gillette. Adam, thank you so much. I want to get to some of your efforts to call out this anti-Semitism on campuses in a moment. But first, these three university presidents all but endorsed calls for genocide and said that's fine. Is it any wonder that students on these campuses have been picking up the cue?
Oh, not at all. This is the end result of decades of the behavior that you just summarized. When you spend decades letting people know that if you misgender somebody, you might be expelled. But if you threaten genocide against other people, as long as they're in the appropriate group, it's A-OK. You spend decades doing that, and of course it leads to the violence, to the harassment, to the threatening that we're seeing on nearly every campus in America today.
And I mean, Adam, tell me about this too, because it's fascinating to me how the whole way of sort of problematizing different races and saying that everything is about an oppressed and oppressor mindset. Is this how we wind up with this bizarre situation where feminists who crusade against any sort of, violence against women and any sort of, abuse of women in the West are also somehow happy to kind of ignore, if not even celebrate, what happened to women in Israel on 10/7?
Yeah, it comes directly from what you're talking about is exactly right. It comes directly from Marxist progressive intersectionality teachings. The notion that everyone should be lumped into a group of either oppressors and oppressed. And all of those who are oppressed, the problem is free enterprise, free market capitalism. The solution is to overthrow capitalism and replace it with Marxism. That's how you get LGBTQ groups teaming up with people who would throw them off of a roof if they were in Gaza or Iran and LGBTQ. That's how you get auto workers teaming up with radical environmentalists who would take away all of their jobs. It's intersectionality.
And Adam, I want you to get your reaction here to the president of the University of Pennsylvania. Now, she put out a video after that disgraceful performance, and if people at home weren't quite following along, she was the one who was almost smirking as she delivered her answer. Let's have a look at how she reacted to the outrage of how she behaved at Capitol Hill.
There was a moment during yesterday's congressional hearing on anti-Semitism when I was asked if a call for the genocide of Jewish people on our campus would violate our policies. In that moment, I was focused on our university's longstanding policies aligned with the U.S. Constitution, which say that speech alone is not punishable. I was not focused on, but I should have been, the irrefutable fact that a call for genocide of Jewish people is a call for some of the most terrible violence human beings can perpetrate.
Now, this is presumably an intelligent person who rose to the top of one of the biggest universities in America. How could she not have gotten that question? She was asked multiple times to pass this very simple test.
Well, she's been facing just as little ramifications and consequences for horrible actions as the anti-Semites on her campus. Until recently. I'll tell you, in the past 36 hours, our activists sent over 13,000 angry emails to the board of trustees of her university. Today, we had a billboard parked outside of her home all day long that had her name, and it said that she was Hamas's best friend in America. It played the shame soundbite from Game of Thrones on a loop for 8 hours. So I'd like to think that we took that smirk off of her face.
Well, and Adam, tell us, you mentioned the billboard. Tell us about the trucks. We've played a little bit of the trucks that you've been putting out around some of the campuses. Tell us about what you've been doing with these. We're seeing some of them up here. Who are these people that you've been putting up and highlighting, and what has the reaction been to your calling out people for saying what they've actually said?
That's right. So at Harvard, for example, 30 student organizations signed a proclamation blaming Israel entirely for the terrorist actions on October 7th. So we took the names and pictures of the student leaders as published by their student newspaper, put them on a billboard and sent them to their campus with the title Harvard's Leading Anti-Semites. Then we bought their domain names like amaributler.com and set up profile pages explaining what they've done. Then we worked with search engine optimization experts so that if you Google them, our page will be the first result or one of the first results. How do they respond? As you'd expect, Violence. When I went to their campus, they assaulted me. They assaulted our cameraman. They bashed our truck with a brick. I get emails every day saying they want to put a Hamas bullet through my head. I didn't know Hamas had branded bullets. I've been swatted 9 times, which means 9 times they called my local law enforcement agency and claimed something like I had a gun to my wife's head to get a SWAT team to come to my home and inadvertently kill me. That's exactly how they've responded. These are wretched human beings. That's why we're going to expose every last one of them.
And they are really wretched because, let's hear from some of the students here on some of these campuses from a variety of schools. They were also on Capitol Hill telling the public and legislators how bad it now is on their campuses. Have a look at this.
Today, in 2023, at NYU, I hear calls to gas the Jews, and I am told that Hitler was right. To the NYU administration, you are not free to selectively enforce your own rules.
36 hours ago, I, along with most of campus, sought refuge in our rooms. As classmates and professors chanted proudly for the genocide of Jews while igniting smoke bombs and defacing school property.
Multiple times a week, on my way to class, I walk by mobs of people chanting "From the river to the sea," which is a call for the destruction of the state of Israel. Most recently, "We have you outnumbered," and "Globalize the Intifada."
Now, that just shows that this is not, just people complaining about nothing here. There's some real serious problems on these campuses. Are these campuses now, after all of this, because we're starting to hear reports that donations are starting to dry up. We're starting to hear that law firms, for example, are saying we won't employ people who were involved with any of this stuff. The reputational and potential financial damage is starting to bite. Are these universities starting to finally wake up to this?
Yes and no. They're providing lip service and claiming that they're going to do things. They claim they're creating committees to deal with anti-Semitism. Hopefully they mean to get rid of it, not to increase it. Hard to tell with some of these universities. They claim they're doing things. I don't believe them for a second. Because sure, some of their donations dry up. They've got billions of dollars in endowments. They're federally funded, even though they're private universities. They're federally funded. So they don't have any reason as a university to reform. That's why it's so incredibly important for us to act. That's why it's so incredibly important for private citizens to act. That's why we send mobile billboards to mom and dad's house of these student leaders so that mom and dad have to explain to their neighbors why their kid doesn't like the Jews. And that's why we're sending mobile billboards to their employers when they graduate so that their future employers can understand exactly who they're working with.
Adam Gillette from Accuracy in Media, keep up the great work. Thank you so much for bringing us the real insights into what's happening on these campuses in America. We'll have you back again in the new year sometime, I'm sure. Now, enough serious stuff. Let's have a little fun. You know how they say that as you get older, you can remember stuff from back decades ago, but have trouble remembering where you left your car keys 5 minutes ago? Hey, where are those keys anyway? Well, Exhibit A for this, Joe Biden, a man who is 81 years old and can't find his way off a stage, but somehow still has the mental agility to brag about his athletic career with stories that go back at least 60 years. Have a look.
Point of personal privilege. I know about this because I went to Syracuse University, long the home of a powerhouse lacrosse program. And I might add, my daughter was a first-rate lacrosse player in high school, and my niece was an All-American lacrosse player at Harvard. So we have a little knowledge of lacrosse in our family. I wanted to play lacrosse, but you had to choose between lacrosse and football. You couldn't play both in the same season. Since I was a powerful 6'1", 158-pound flankerback, I was the runner-up a state scoring championship. Don't laugh, man.
All right, 1, how insecure is this guy bragging about being a powerful 6'1" guy, whatever. But number 2, sorry, I'm going to call you out, Mr. President, because lacrosse and football are played in different seasons. Looks like even when you're reminiscing, you're lying. Ha! John Fund after the break. Welcome back to the program. Joining me now is political journalist John Fund. John, thanks so much for joining me tonight on the U.S. Report. An interesting comment from Joe Biden this week. He said he may have skipped mounting a 2024 re-election bid if he were not facing Donald Trump. Now, that's quite ironic given Trump's performance in the polls at the moment, don't you think?
Well, let's face it, every Democrat in Washington with any kind of political sense knows that Joe Biden is the one Democrat Donald Trump could certainly beat. And all of the polls indicate that. Joe Biden is in a very curious position with that comment because he says that, of course, he's accomplished so much. Bidenomics, which, of course, has bombed in the polls. Foreign policy successes, I don't know what they are, but he claims that they exist. So you'd think that a president would be running on his record. Instead, Biden, remember, in 2020, James, he told us, I'm going to be a transition figure. I'm old enough that I recognize I may well serve only one term, and I'm a transition to the next generation. Well, apparently he loves the White House so much, or perhaps Dr. Jill, the First Lady, loves the White House so much, he's decided to run again. But instead of running on his record, he's running because Donald Trump is my opponent, and I have to save democracy from Donald Trump. The real sadness of our election, if it's going to be a race of Trump versus Biden 2.0, is that it sounds like it's a political grudge match. Donald Trump is running for revenge, and Joe Biden is running because he somehow has convinced himself he's the only man who can save America from Donald Trump.
Well, and that's the whole thing there. I mean, when now it turns into this grudge match, because that's exactly the phrase I was thinking about when you were walking us through all of this here. In a country where you have low voter turnout or compulsory voting like you do in Australia, how does this inspire anybody except for the true haters on one side or the other to come out and vote on Election Day? We're in for a very negative campaign, wouldn't you say?
Oh, that's guaranteed. The consequences of that negative campaign may be twofold. One, an explosion of interest in third-party candidates, whether it be Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or Cornel West, who's running as an independent, or Jill Stein, who's running as the Green Party candidate, and a much lower voter turnout. You know, I ran into a focus group the other day that I sat in on, and there was a woman there who was very wise. She said, you know, I fear that my choice next year is not going to be the lesser of two evils, but the evil of two lessers.
That's an interesting way to put it. But, you know, the thing is, too, John, you know, with these focus groups and being around politics, the thing that ultimately determines how elections go very often is simply the economy. And the public does not buy Bidenomics, as you suggested. More than 4 in 10 say they are seriously concerned about rising costs. Have a listen to this little exchange on CNN that happened the other day.
So on issue number one of the economy, it's a pretty poor outlook from the American people. Only 29% assess current economic conditions as good. 71% say they are poor. And his approval rating, the president's approval rating on the economy data, is even worse than his overall approval rating. It's only at 33%, 67% disapprove.
Now, we talk about history sometimes on this show, John, and I'm very much put in mind of the 1980 Ronald Reagan campaign when he asked, are you better off than you were 4 years ago when Jimmy Carter was president? And at the same time, also, Iran was acting up. The Middle East was a mess. Energy prices were soaring. There was a lot of deja vu here. Do these numbers almost guarantee a Trump win, or does Trump's, other foibles wind up causing him other troubles?
To be determined. The Republican nomination has Trump as, of course, the clear front runner, but it's not a done deal because I believe the Democrats are looking for a way to swap Joe Biden out of the race, making him an offer he can't refuse, perhaps. Maybe even suggesting that, maybe there is something to this Hunter Biden thing after all. You never know. If Trump continues to lead Biden in the polls, the Democrats may go that route. But you're absolutely right about the economy, James. There's a new poll out from Civics which says the American people recognize that inflation has fallen, but they also recognize that the basic basket of goods, food, fuel, housing, all the things that they consume, is up 22% under Biden. And very few Americans have gotten a 22% raise in the last 3 years. What the voters tell this pollster is, we do not believe the war on inflation will be licked until prices fall below where they were before the inflation started. That creates an enormous barrier to Joe Biden. That's a steeplechase that he may not be able to overcome, even if he has a second term. So Biden may think he's conquered inflation, but right now, inflation is conquering his political chances.
Yeah, and Joe Biden and Dr. Jill, as you say, you know, they're not going to the grocery store every week and trying to put together a basket of goods to feed a family, or filling up the presidential limo and seeing, you know, how much that's costing, while ordinary Americans do. How much of this then really comes down to a fight over what feels like, to me, an awful lot of people feeling like the American compact is broken, the middle class compact is broken, that, you know, if you work hard and you do the right thing, you can have a comfortable middle class lifestyle with some degree of affluence. That seems to be harder and more out of reach for an awful lot of people. And Biden, he gets the blame for a lot of this, doesn't he?
Well, the incumbent in charge gets credit for things that he had nothing to do with. He also gets blames for things that he didn't have much to do with. You're absolutely right, James. About 20% of Americans believe that their children and grandchildren will lead as good a life or a better life than they did. That's an incredibly pessimistic number for people. Now, there are a lot of complications for that, but the bottom line is real incomes were going up under Trump, despite all of the chaos and the noise and all of that, of course a lot of people didn't like, and they have fallen or been stagnant under Biden. That alone is a deadly peril to Biden's reelection, and which is why Democrats are scratching their heads saying, can we go all the way with this guy for the next year, hoping that there's, shall we say, another slip up somewhere on a podium that reveals the incumbent?
Yeah, look, as I keep saying, John, I don't think he's going to be on the ballot in November. It's just a question of how they wind up getting him off. John Fund, thank you so much, as always, for your insights. Now to news from the world of business, where it's another case of life imitating art. And this time, it's not the Babylon Bee. Instead, it seems like seafood chain Red Lobster is in a bit of trouble, as its ultimate endless shrimp package, that's prawns to you Aussies, is sending it broke. On an investor call this week, they revealed the company was going to post an $11 million operating loss this quarter, all because customers, well, they love the all-you-can-eat deal. Kind of reminds me of, didn't something similar to this happen on The Simpsons once?
That man ate all our shrimp and 2 plastic lobsters.
Tis no man, tis a remorseless eating machine. Arr. 6 bells, time for closing.
Can't talk, eating.
Fairly warned be thee, says I.
Hey! 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 But the sign said all you can eat.
Arr, he should have gone to Red Lobster. Don't go anywhere, Only in America is next. And now it's time for a little segment we like to call Only in America. You've heard of UFC fighting? Well, check out these guys here. They've come up with something they call UFG fighting. I suspect the G stands for glass, pitting their favorite liquors against each other in the ring. What am I talking about? Well, it's actually pretty exciting and a little bit weird. Let's have a look.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the UFG. We have a special lineup tonight of your favorite beverages.
Jack, we do. We've got another 8-fighter bracket. Let's meet the fighters here tonight. We've got Jose Cuervo versus Bacardi.
Wow, yes. We've got Windsor, the Canadian, up against Johnny Walker.
And then we're going to have the Irishman Jameson versus Tito's.
And finally, we've got Doers up against Captain Morgan. Let's take a look at the bracket. Lock in your votes right now for who you think is going to come out on top tonight. Up first, we've got Jose Cuervo versus Bacardi.
Let's get into it.
Look at this. They're swinging low, bouncing off of the boards, getting...
Oh!
Jose Cuervo takes a part of Bacardi off. You see it right here, but I think the ref is going to keep this fight going.
Yeah.
There it is,
finishing move.
Yes.
Wow.
Take a closer look at this destruction, and we're moving on to the next fight.
Yeah, now we have Windsor versus Johnny Walker. Two pretty hefty fighters here, Jack. They're getting really close to hitting each other here. Oh, yeah, we're going to see a connection probably right about here. Oh! Ooh, big hit.
No blood drawn.
No blood drawn yet. Oh my gosh! And Windsor gets knocked off his rope. Wow! He hits the bottom of the floor there. Ref's going to give them another swing, not enough destruction.
Oh my goodness, there it is.
Whoa! Yeah, my tip is start building this setup now in your garage to be ready for a little Christmas UFG action. That's all the time we've got for this week. And remember, don't try this at home. Bye-bye.